r/AskReddit by Reddit and chill. Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment in court? Not oh shit bad. Oh shit, I can't believe she said that. First jury trial. Pretty serious charges. I'm cross-examining the alleged victim. And in answering my question she says, oh yeah, I lie all the time. Needless to say, I won that trial. What if that was a lie? Hug, Mr. Fancy Lawyer Man. LOL. Great. That's perjury. Spare me your big college words. All I want to know is if juror number 6 knows how many guns I own. Reposting myself from years ago. Story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charge dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facer palmed on that one. Whoa, that's some special kind of stupid. Kinda wholesome in my opinion. Wholesome stupidity. Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs. To which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for heroin. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. This is so true and sucks so bad in family court hearings because there's so rarely an opportunity to know how the witness is going to testify. Also, you can't legally tell them what to say, but you can go over hypothetical questions the prosecutor might ask and see how they'll answer. I'm guessing you learned that lesson that day. Sat in the public gallery at a bail hearing for a man accused of heinous crimes against a very young female relative. The judge started laying out the conditions of bail and one of them was to surrender his passport. Man turned to his attorney and said, loudly, words to the effect of, "But you said I could fly back to my home country." The judge stopped himself and revoked the man's bail. Edit. This post brought to you by the words flight and risk. Also, his home country was out of reach of extradition. Edit again. This was not in the USA. Every country has foreigners. I want to see the attorney's face in that moment. Thinking, gosh, did I say that, you ducking child molester? The judge had almost finished when he raised a hand and thought again. He frowned, fatigued, and rubbed an eye. He breathed a single weary sigh. The judge remained in silence, still without a word to say, until he rose and turned his gaze below. He whispered softly, slowly, number. A lawyer I used to know was in court on a work injury case. The judge asked his client, just what is the nature of your injury? His client replied, I can't raise my arm this high anymore, while she raised her arm up to show just how high she couldn't raise it. OMG, that's ducking gold. Case dismissed. Bring in the dancing lobsters. Then the gallery applauded. I was prosecuting a contempt action in family court, something that basically never works, and everyone in the room could tell I was winning. The other side was unprepared, out of arrogance, and I was basically ripping this guy to shreds on cross-examination, which his lawyer didn't even think would happen, because he expected the case to be dismissed. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled for me and stated that she found the defendant's testimony to be untrustworthy. I was shocked at winning a contempt trial to begin with, but then this exchange happened. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, now that you have found my client's testimony to be untrustworthy, I am requesting a continuance in order to prepare further witnesses. This concept is shocking in and of itself, because to even think you can bring more witnesses after you rest your case is laughable. Judge, you had your shot and you missed. Counsel, defendant's attorney, Your Honor, there was no way I could have anticipated that you'd find my client's testimony untrustworthy, and as such, I didn't have the opportunity to prepare other witnesses in support of his position. Judge, that may be an argument for your career. Counsel, but it holds no water with me. See you this afternoon for sentencing. That shit was mind-blowing on multiple levels. I was the defendant, representing a non-profit that I volunteered for. The plaintiff was a 60-something grandma who was looking for a retirement settlement after falling out of her jacked-up pickup truck in our parking lot. The premise of her case was that our parking lot was in bad shape. It was. And that she fell into a pothole and broke her leg, which resulted in her having to take Coumadin and diminished her enjoyment of salads at the Friday night fish fry. No, really, it was going along fine. Until my lawyer put up a photo of the pothole, taken the day of the incident, filled to the brim with water, after a recent rain. He asked the lady if she had gotten her foot wet, to which she replied that she couldn't recall. He talked a little more about how perhaps if her foot wasn't wet, it might have been because she fell out of the truck and didn't really fall into the pothole. He asked again if her foot was wet, and she affirmed that yes, her foot was wet. The oh shit moment came when he went back to his desk, flipped through her deposition and read the part where she was extremely adamant that her foot wasn't wet. Then he did some fancy legal stuff. The case was thrown out and I went back to work. That's some legally blonde shit right there. Right. Who TF eats salad at a fish fry? The kinds of people who sue people over potholes. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, I shit you not, told me to shut the duck up. She doesn't know. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Please proceed, Governor. An absolute classic. Link for the uninitiated. Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late. His work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, I'm glad you are the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room. So they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney. I cover courts for a local paper, so I see a lot of cases. There are only 2 really bad lawyers I've seen that stand out, and one was almost exactly as you described. He would constantly get things wrong and then accuse the prosecutor of mixing things up to confuse the jury or whatever. I swear he appeared to be asleep at one point. Maybe his case was so bad he was angling for poor assistance of counsel. Who knows? But both were so terrible that I was shocked by A, their ages, as they had to have been doing it for some time, and B, their ducking gall. Like, both were just so brazen in court that it bordered on contempt. Nothing like the confidence on a mediocre attorney. Person I was representing was on trial for assault in the 3rd degree and DUI. In my state, A3 means you've assaulted an aid worker or police officer and is a felony. The allegations are that he was very verbally abusive to the officers and, at one point, kicked one in the face. We're sitting at the defendant's table and the officer is testifying about the statements my guy made to him, including some pretty horrific name calling. Out of nowhere, my client screams, "You're a ducking liar. Duck you son of a beach." We lost the trial. Another time, the judge asked the client whether anyone had coerced him into pleading guilty, and he said, "Yeah, my attorney." I about shit my pants, but he laughed and said, "I'm joking." No. Are jokes like that taken at face value, or was the judge cool with it? Pretty straight-laced judge in a full courtroom. He was fine with it, though. I was just interning in court during law school, but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club. Someone had broken someone else's jaw and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never had a beard and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of, "My friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. What terms did they have trouble explaining? That's like 6th grade language. Tops. I accidentally deleted my own comment. It was in Spanish. The term was something like profesional del sector de la restauración and it sounded weird as duck. He worked in fast food. Jesus dude. Who the duck talks like that? Obviously they got caught. Just say Trabager and la industria de commodus Trabager and un restaurant professional de commodus cocinero. How ducking hard is it? I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room. And after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. Was the alteration that obvious? It was an age discrimination case. It wasn't a very strong case, but one of our arguments was that my client's supervisor railroaded him by terminating him without following the proper procedures. This employer, a government entity, is supposed to give its employees certain number of days of advance notice before a termination. During discovery, the employer disclosed documents that indicated that they didn't give the client proper advance notice. During the hearing, the witness shows up with the same paperwork, but with completely different dates, indicating that they didn't give him the proper notice. The alteration was obvious to me because I was going to examine that witness as to the date. So once I looked at the document she was giving me, it was obvious that something was wrong. Their lawyer had earlier given me an entirely different set of documents. I should mention that this was a hearing before a civil service commission and not an Article 3 court, so discovery was a little less rigid. Anyways, their forgery turned a weak case into a strong case. Isn't the forgery a crime in of itself? Watching a hearing when the defendant said I did stab her, but it was a gentle stabbing. Reminds me of something I read on here where the person said I hit her with a knife. Stabbing. That's called stabbing. He ran into my knife. He ran into my knife 10 times. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case, where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. So the homie roll kid was a robber too then? Yeah, for sure. I should have said the mentor dude had a lot of very specific distinguishing features where there was like no way it could be a coincidence. I was like, you know, not gonna need that reference after all. Thanks for your time, sir. Please stay far away from the courthouse that day. That's gold. Sitting in court, doing some plea paperwork with a defense attorney for a go-home plea agreement, where person is released from custody and doesn't have to do jail time. We hear this KSSSSSSSSTT shuru to our left and we look to see his guy sitting in the galley all by himself, sitting in the cloud of a biggest vape hit I have ever seen. Then has the audacity to tell the judge it went off in his hand. Do not pass go. Do not go free that day. Aside from non-smoking rules likely demanding he pays a fine to the building, is there any basis for vaping to alter the course of someone's case? All of the character witnesses get to leave early. Judges are usually very particular about how people conduct themselves in their courtroom. I've seen a cell phone ring and the judge have the person tossed out. They were a witness in an upcoming case and it had to be continued. Lawyer here. I had a pre-trial conference at 9 AM at a court about 2 hours away, so I wake my ass up super early to drive in shitty weather to the conference. I get there and we're waiting for the other, in town, attorney. All the while I'm grumbling to myself about how I'm from out of town and I can still make it on time. Finally the court calls the other attorney's office and gets a receptionist who tells us through tears that other attorney passed away the night before. Needless to say I was just happy to still be alive and we rescheduled for a few months later. Rude of him not to inform you he was going to die the night before. Bold of you to assume death is real. Dude was just scared to face you. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse. So I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill. But the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few hundred years in jail. Edit. Clarification in the third paragraph. This is just an unfortunate birthmark, Your Honor. It's German. It doesn't say die Bart. Die. It says the Bart. The. Edit. To all who are pointing out the errors in my comment, please know it was a Simpsons quote. YouTube link. I was interning during law school prosecuting domestic violence cases. The deputy DA asked me to talk for the first time during a guy's arraignment for beating his wife. An arraignment is when the defendant hears the charges against them and pleads guilty or not guilty basically. When the judge calls on me to speak, I got insanely nervous and told the defendant that his charge carried a maximum penalty of 30 years, when it was actually 30 days. He freaks out. The crowd, some in the gallery were his family and friends, gasps. The judge basically stops me and says, "I think you mean 30 days, counselor," after which everyone, including the defendant, laughed at me. Edit. Because a lot of you are worried about this, the evidence was pretty weak and the facts did not bear charging anything other than the lowest level misdemeanor, which, in conjunction with this being a first offense, meant that we were seeking two things primarily: counseling, anger management classes, and probation. The intent being that any future problems can hopefully be avoided, and if not, we could stick the defendant with a harsh punishment the next time when we hopefully have better facts evidence. And in turn I worked with did the same thing for driving while suspended. Third, said 10 years to the judge for the recommended sentence instead of 10 days. Represented a pro bono client that had just turned 18 and was charged with serious property damage. I walk into his bail hearing and the judge looks at him and goes, "I knew you'd be back as an adult." The judge then turns to me and says, "Counselor, you may want to learn about your client's history. No bail." Edit. To answer some of the questions below, I considered it to be extremely inappropriate and objected to it. Juvenile records are sealed for a reason. The judge overruled the objection but made sure to articulate that his denial of bail was for reasons related to the instant case. The firm I was at had a pro bono program and worked with the public defender service in the area. The judge at the bail hearing wasn't the judge for all other hearings in the case. He just happened to be the one handling bail hearings that afternoon. I thought that juvenile record couldn't be considered in court as an adult. Probably in sentencing. But the judge's discretion decides bail. Edit. What a boring comment to be the highest upvoted thing I've posted. Particularly if the judge sees a recidivist. Lots of things like "I'll change my ways and I won't make the same mistake again" are said to judges, especially with troubled youth. But if a judge keeps seeing them, then there isn't much incentive to allow someone like that to go free and potentially commit more crimes. Bail isn't an intrinsic right. Not in court but a deposition. Plaintiff in a sexual harassment case that was suspected to be paid role play with her boss kept a very detailed sex diary on her work computer. At one point she was asked to read from the diary for the record and asked if she had written the accounts and if they were true. But she was asked at several points if she wanted her new husband to leave the room while she did this, but declined. Let's just say it was extremely kinky. She confirmed it was true, and the only mention of her now husband was that he was boring in bed, but she was going to marry him because she couldn't get her first, second or third choice. He ended up leaving on his own after she read that part out and confirmed it was him she was writing about. Why TF didn't she have him leave? Unless her kink was publicly humiliate her, so then I understand completely. Because he was her third choice, and she was about to get a big payout from the case, assumedly. I think this qualifies, though it wasn't me that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty, was at the jury selection phase, and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not, blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, "Oh, this ought to be good," and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, "Okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict." Lawyer's face went "oh shit" commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, Verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home. And they start over. After reading other stories in this thread, it sounds like you saved yourself quite a tongue lashing by suggesting that it be in private. Damn, you even asked to say it in private. They should have known better than to tell the courtroom. When I had jury selection, there was a notepad and pen for anyone who wanted to privately explain why they felt they should be exempt. It was such a simple solution to let the judge and lawyer see the reason before deciding. Do you see the defendant here in court? Witness victim looks at each jury member, then everyone in the audience. Nope. Judge hides his face behind file folder. Are you sure? Maybe over on this side. Witness looks confused. I'm not sure. I point at defendant. Maybe over at this table by that lawyer. Yep, maybe. Keep in mind defendant victim knew each other very well. Edit. Format and spelling edit too. I used the defendant's name. And he was in plain view from the witness stand. I think the witness was just nervous because he was buddies with the defendant. Yes, my questions couldn't have been more leading. OC was fine with me creating apathy in the minds of the jury. Is this one of those law and order moments where the witness started lying in court? I'm still not sure if he was lying or just an imbecile. He had seen the defendant earlier and asked if he could wait in my office so he wouldn't be in the same room with him. Do you think this is because they are confused by the term defendant? Not a lawyer, but was working at the jail when an inmate came back from court and immediately went on suicide watch. Apparently he was up for a plea deal and was only looking at 6 months, but started questioning some of the facts, which let in a ton of previously denied evidence. This new evidence linked him to 6 BNDs and rapes. He walked out of court facing a 99-year sentence, which he was certain to get, all because he opened his mouth. Edit. The lawyers were arguing over a pair of the victim's panties. He apparently chimed in with something he shouldn't have known. That brought in evidence that was previously inadmissible to not only this case, but 5 other burglary rapes. Evidence, which by the transport officer's words, good enough to metaphorically duck him for 100 years. Well, also because he'd committed heinous crimes. Good, that utter piece of shit. Not a lawyer, but I had a big oh shit moment. I was in court for driving while suspended in a county and in front of a judge that were both notorious for putting people who did that in jail. My license wasn't supposed to be suspended. A pencil pusher forgot to press a button or something and it never got unsuspended after the time was up. I had proof of this, but I was still really nervous. The guy who went up to the judge before me walked to the table where we were supposed to stand, sat down, and put his feet up on the table. The judge asked him what he was doing and he gave a flippant answer and basically told the judge to get ducked. This seriously pissed the judge off. The judge went off on this guy and the guy gave everything right back to him, pissing him off more and more. The judge ended up jailing him for contempt and had the bailiff cuff the guy and put him in a chair off to the side to await the marshals who would transport him to the jail. My name gets called. The judge is looking at me like I'm fresh meat and he is a great white shark. I'm already thinking to myself, okay, if this judge puts you in jail, run over and beat the shit out of the guy that pissed the judge off so badly. He's why you're going to jail. The judge looks down at his paperwork and back at me and says, "You're Mr. My last name?" I said, "Yes sir." He said, "Yeah, we were talking about you earlier. I'm going to void your arrest and dismiss this case. Your license was supposed to be valid and you shouldn't be here." Ducking, like and subscribe.